Welcome to Mars.
My first attempt to colonise Mars ended in disaster. It had all been looking so good as I ambitiously expanded, set up new domes, broadened the reach of my drone network, and then one of my key sources of water was taken away from me by one of the mysteries of Mars. My local food and resource production was then exposed as being nowhere near good enough to survive, and yeah, my colonists started dying, and surviving Mars was certainly living up to its billing. Some of the initial challenge in this colony builder is simply figuring out what you need to do and how you can do it. If you're playing on console, you can also then add in the fact that you need to get used to some slightly unintuitive controls. What's nice is the realism at the heart of surviving Mars. You're not landing humans straight onto the planet, but sending a wave of adorable little drones to lay the foundation, set up the mining facilities, get resources together, and set up domes that are actually, habitable spaces for humans to live in. So as your handful of drones trundle down the ramp of your reusable rockets, your first job will be to place the prefabricated drone hub that you will have needed to have packed on board, then construct some solar panels, connect them up with power lines, find a source of concrete to dredge up, and start to turn water into fuel for the rockets to make the return trip. Haemimont don't really hold your hand through this, so it's pretty daunting to start off with. This is especially true if you decide to customize your starting setup by picking your sponsor, the contents of your first rocket load of resources, the mission leader's background, and then the landing point on Mars, which can dramatically increase the difficulty. All of these decisions will make your early progress easier or harder. So, having the USA funding your project gives you plenty of cash to throw at the problem, and tons of reusable rockets to send back and forth. But then, if you pick Russia, it's a bit more stingy, not to mention the Church of the New Ark, which send you out there on a hope and a prayer. Either way, you soon learn that attention to detail and planning is vital to your success. You need to gradually grow step by step, making sure that there's a steady supply of water, oxygen and power before building a habitable dome, and then the accommodation and services within. Then, if you want to build a second dome, you need to have the redundancy so that if a disaster does strike and they're cut off, they can survive on their own for a little bit whilst you connect everything back together. Then, once you do get some humans onto the red planet, it's a case of making sure that they are kept busy and geared towards self-sufficiency, researching and building farms, mines, production lines of fuel, making mechanical parts, and more. Picking the colonists with the right specializations and character quirks is pretty important to this as well, and you do get the opportunity to filter the applicants for this Martian expedition. Finding yourself short of any one of the core resources can completely screw you over, causing a ripple effect through your colony if you aren't flexible enough with it. Everything wears down and gets clogged up with the Martian dust over time, so it needs to be serviced and repaired every once in a while. But this takes up resources, and obviously you need to wait for one of your little drones to trundle over with what is needed to fix things. If you don't have the electronic parts to fix your drone hub, for example, then that will shut down. Or alternatively, you need the mechanical bits for your wind turbine, and you can just be up a creek without a paddle if you don't have enough of this being produced locally or sent out on a rocket. Every once in a while the game will try to catch you out, so there's dust storms that can spin through and disrupt your naturally fragile infrastructure. There's occasional meteor strikes, and then there's the mysteries of Mars as well. These narrative events, which are random by default but can be specifically chosen or just turned off entirely if you don't want them, they add an extra adversity for you to overcome. My first encounter was with the dredgers, and as I raced to try and understand them while still building up my colony, I eventually overextended, it creaked and buckled in part due to their presence. With 9 of these mysteries in the game at launch, they offer plenty of replay value and intrigue to coming back to the game time and again. Another fascinating element is the research tree, which gives you various technologies in a shifting, slightly randomized order. They're the gateway to building larger domes, having the means of production instead of simply trading resources back to Earth, and you can also improve your colony's efficiency. Most of these are fairly common sense, but you can also make significant scientific breakthroughs, sometimes centered around a mystery. So with the dredgers, it was trying to find a way to communicate with them. But elsewhere, Surviving Mars throws up these 1960s sci-fi cliches, like discovering empathic abilities. These are often uncovered by sending out a rover to investigate the anomalies that your scanning of the surrounding area uncovers. Unfortunately, there are a few weaknesses to Surviving Mars at launch. I would love to see a lot more detail and information being put into the hands of the players so that you can much better manage your colonists and the flow of resources through what you've built. The colony info panel is just very basic, and it doesn't really give you an idea of where the problem in your colony might lie. It suffices early on, but it's nowhere detailed enough when you've got a huge sprawling colony, and resources need to flow smoothly from one end to the other in order to keep buildings maintained. Some kind of resources view, such as those that we see in city skylines, would have been ideal here. At the same time, personnel management is a pain to the extent that I basically just don't bother with it. You want geologists down in the resource mining facilities, you want engineers in the factories, scientists in the research labs, and so on. But the manner in which you actually get colonists and choose from the applicants is awkward and time-consuming, even if there are plenty of filters for you to work with. Worse than that is that when they're actually living in your colony, the interface for managing them is poorly thought out, even before you consider that a lot of people are going to be navigating it with a console gamepad instead of a mouse and keyboard. In fairness, the game does do a pretty good job of automatically giving out appropriate roles, but it's those times when you want or need to override it that are a pain. And for example, having a medic down a mine when I've got a geologist spare, it just doesn't make sense, and it's not as intuitive as I would like it to be. This was compounded by a few minor niggles when playing on PlayStation 4, both in the design and with a handful of bugs that have managed to survive through the day one patch. Interacting with buildings, drones and people, it has you pulling the right trigger so that you can then navigate the info panel with the D-pad, or holding the trigger and pressing shortcuts. It takes some time to get used to and never really feels that natural, and on top of that you're using very similar inputs to do different things in different areas, which can add a little bit to the confusion. There's also stuff like the central reticule that seemed to always have a tendency to select something just to the left of what I wanted it to, and it's not always clear what can be selected when, for example, trying to send a drone to collect raw materials on the surface, which actually just tend to look like plain rocks which you can't interact with, or also reassigning a colonist to work in a different building. What you're actually seeing in the background here is before the day one patch has been released, but the day one patch did go a long way to addressing almost all of the balance issues that I'd found in the game and many of the other weird little bugs that were there in the controls. If we do ever try to colonize our red neighbour, it is going to be one of the biggest challenges that mankind will ever undertake. And though Surviving Mars makes a game out of this, Haemimont have brilliantly kept that hard edge, as it constantly pushes and tests your ability to plan with survival in mind. This is especially true when you have to deal with the unpredictability of the mysteries of Mars. I think there's still plenty of ways to keep improving it, and with Paradox Interactive as the publisher, you can almost bet that they're going to keep coming back to it, adding and iterating on it with patches and expansions. But first on the list, I want to see them put more colony control into the hands of the players. Even with some of these flaws, I think that Surviving Mars is off to a great start, and if you are a fan of city builders and colony builders, then this is definitely one worth checking out. Thanks as ever for watching our videos. You can also catch this review over on the6thAxis.com. Before you go, please do like, subscribe and share, and hopefully we will see you again soon. Goodbye!